Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session of Doing Ethnography Seminar Workshop in partnership with Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao Incorporated, or UGAT, the Anthropological Association or the Anthropological Association of the Philippines. So this morning, we have had the discussion of Module 1 on the overview of ethnography and the principles of ethnography, which was comprehensively discussed by Sir Eli Giab and Soyen Roldan. For this afternoon, I think we are now ready to listen to the resource speaker on Module 2. So it is divided into two, Module 2A and Module 2B. Allow me now to introduce the resource speaker on Module 2A on the ethnography at home. Our resource speaker is Ramon Felipe A. Sarmiento. Sir Ramon Felipe A. Sarmiento is a native of Vera, Catanduanes. He holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of the Philippines, a Master of Science in General Sociology from the Asian Social Institute, and an AB in Political Science from the Catanduanes State University. Currently, he is an Associate Professor 5 at the Catanduanes State University and served as Director for both the Research and Development Services and the Center for Catanduanon Heritage. Recently, he was designated as Vice President for Research, Extension, and Production Affairs. Aside from teaching, his professional career spans both social science research and creative writing. Among his major studies conducted are depiction of culture in Philippine independent films and research culture in the social sciences, issues of unfair practices in major universities in the Philippines, co-investigator for De La Salle University. Ethnography of vote buying in Vera, Catanduanes, and source book on the history of Catanduanes for the Catanduanes State University, and the Ermitas of Vera, tangible and intangible aspects of a religious cultural heritage for the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He has published scholarly articles in refereed journals such as the Aghamtao, Journal of the Philippine Anthropological Association, and the Philippine Studies Journal of the Ateneo de Manila University. He has contributed scholarly essays in books such as Religious Diversity Today, published by Prager, California, the Global Encyclopedia of Informality, published by the University College London, and the CCP Encyclopedia. He dabbles in creative writing, for which he has garnered some recognition, such as the Palanca Award, the Centennial Literary Prize, and the Teatro Bulawan Prize from the NCCA. His book, Tatlong Dulang Pampelikula, co-author, won the National Book Award Screenplay category in 2003, given by the Manila Critics Circle. Films he wrote have been exhibited at the Cannes Films Festival. He's currently finalizing the source book on the history of Catanduanes for publication. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome our first resource speaker for this afternoon, Ramon Felipe Sarmiento. Hi, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Am I getting through?
Yes, sir. Audible po.
Yeah, I have sound slide presentation. So, I have not done this before. So I am supposed to click share screen. Naka ano na yung slide ko?
Screen, Doc, man.
Ready na sa laptop ko. Ay, hello Ma'am Jo.
Hi, good afternoon. Just click share screen.
Okay, let me try it. Share. Okay. That's it. So, nakikita na po yung aking slide.
Doc, man, click slideshow. Click slideshow.
Slideshow.
At the bottom. May command ng slideshow sa bottom.
So, isa-isa. Okay. From beginning. Yata. Ay, hindi. Slideshow. Teka. Hindi pa pumapasok ang slide ko, Jo. Hindi nga ba yun? Baka nandiyan. Kasi nasa taas na eh.
Okay na po, sir. Nakikita na po namin. Slide
Okay.
show na lang, please. Opo.
So naka-display na yung aking...
Yes po.
Okay,
I-slide show na lang po, tabi.
Kailangan niyang i-slideshow. Anyways, it's okay kasi nakikita naman.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. It's okay na po.
Ba't mahari? So, tangan yung mahiling ko sa kutos. Teka. Some parts of the slide, the screen is hindi makita.
Minimize ko na lang.
Okay. So ayan. So I'm getting through. Ma'am. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes po.
Okay. So magandang hapon sa lahat. Gismed na hapon sa gabus dyan. Mga Bicolano man gabus tabi. Ano ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So my presentation is doing ethnography at home. So I understand that there has already been a presentation in the morning giving a comprehensive background on ethnography. Pero ako siguro, let me just reiterate. Let me start by reminding everybody siguro about ethnography very briefly. So ethnography is the anthropologist's method of doing research. It is basically the description and analysis of the culture of a group or a community. Now, it can be done both on a large scale, where one attempts to take account of the entire culture of a community, or on a limited scale, where one focuses only on a particular aspect of the culture. Now, ethnography relies heavily on participant observation and interview of key informants, but it can make use of other data gathering techniques. So, ang ethnography ay masaya kasi multi-method. Hindi ka mabuburo sa isa lamang na method of data gathering tulad ng survey. I think that's one of the attractions for me, of ethnography. Now, however, even if it's the methodology of the anthropologist, ethnography had been adapted by many other disciplines in the social sciences. Halimbawa, researchers in education had been making use a lot of ethnography. Ngayon, even yung mga researches on the environment ay na-maximize din ang paggamit ng ethnography for good results. Okay. So doing ethnography at home, what is, sabi ko dito, what is the big deal really? Okay. Now, anthropology, being the study of the other, involves going to very far, strange place, something very far from one's own, in order to investigate exotic cultures. Ganyan-ganyan yung traditional anthropology, talagang sabi nila, study of the other. People who are drastically different from you. So that is the romantic, the romance of the discipline, pupunta ka sa isang lugar, malayo, it's really an adventure. But then it came to pass, however, that anthropologists started to train their gaze on more familiar milieus, those that are at home or those that are near home. itong development na to, maraming dahilan kung bakit nag-umpisa na itong tinatawag na ethnography or anthropology at home. Unang-una siguro nagkaubusan na ng mga tribo. Pangalawa, to do anthropology in exotic places means a lot of gastos, no? Tsaka effort. Kaya kung you do not do it in the traditional way, you can do it also at home. Hindi masyado yung malayo. Kaya ayun, nag-umpisa ng mauso din yung anthropology at home. Now, doing ethnography at home offers certain premiums, no? Ito rin ang isa sa ito yung mga dahilan din kung bakit more and more anthropologists are doing this. Unang-una, sabi ko kanina, less costly. You don't have to travel. You don't have to go to far places. And well, it's less time consuming. Dati-rati yung anthropology, yung ethnography pala, naabot ng taon, no? Usually, an anthropologist would, at the minimum, would like to cover the entire year para ma-cover niya yung mga seasons sa isang culture, isang buong cycle. And there are anthropologists who stay for more than a year, no? Merong nag-aral sa Palawan ng 10 taon. So, but doing anthropology at home, hindi naman ganun kailangan ganun na scope of work. And then another thing, kung bakit we do anthropology at home, another positive side is, you know, it offers us the opportunity to understand one's own culture more deeply, which is typically taken for granted. Kapag sarili nating culture, we take it for granted. Ina-assume natin na alam na natin, and that's counterproductive. So do something like an anthropology at home so that you gain deep understanding of your very own culture. Now, another thing is we think it's more authentic. No, you get more authentic results because if you study, because your study has immediate relevance to you as an anthropologist, and the other thing, the understanding that you gain is already built in dun sa mismong researcher. Sabi nga nila, there's nobody in a better position to understand a culture, but you know, the natives, the native practitioners of it. Kaya, yun, hindi na kailangan yung anthropologist masyadong mag-trying hard kasi naka-built in na yung understanding, yung kultura mismo nakaugat na sa kanya. So yun yung some of the important reasons why we should do anthropology at home. Okay, now, there are some challenges when you do anthropology at home, no? May downside. Halimbawa, mahirap talaga na to get rid of cultural blinders, yung mga biases. Precisely, kaya dati-rati yung anthropologist kailangang outsider kasi para wala siyang bias, wala siyang mga baggage. Okay? Pagpasok niya sa culture, sa isang kultura, sa isang cultural community, wala siyang masyadong preconceived ideas. Kaya you are in a position to to really come up with something very objective understanding of the culture. Kasi meron kang distance, no, di ba, yung distance natin kailangan yun para maging objective yung results ng ating distant observation ng ating mga findings. Pero if you do it anthropology at home, you are a member or practitioner of that very culture you are studying, mahirap tanggalin itong mga blinders na to. Now another, a downside of doing anthropology at home is it's very discomforting. The discomforts of othering your own people. Parang you're supposed to be intimate with them. You consider yourself to be one with them, pero dahil you're going to study them, you have to consider them as the other. Okay? Ididistansya mo sarili mo sa kanila. Medyo mahirap talagang gawin. Related to that, no? You have to fight the tendency, yung tinatawag nating familiarity breeds contempt. This is something methodological kasi sabi nga nila, the prophet is not welcome in his own village. Masyado ka ng familiar sa kanila, so parang, sino ba yan? Bakit naman yan nandito para pag-aralan tayo? Ano namang drama niya? Ganyan. Yung ganyang tendency, mahirap yan kalabanin. You might not be able to get the cooperation of your informants. They might become, skeptic about what you're trying to do. Kaya yan yung mga kalaban. Although dito sa Pilipinas, hindi ko masyado ito nakita kasi yung mga Pilipino naman ay very generous in sharing information. Sa kulturang Pilipino, hindi ito masyado problema sa tingin ko in my own experience. Okay, so that's doing anthropology at home. Now, to be able to demonstrate what I'm trying to talk about here, doing anthropology at home or ethnography at home, I am presenting 2 case studies. Okay, so meron akong ginawang 2 study na tinuturing kong ethnography at home. Itong 2 ito ay i-present ko one after the other. Now, but they have certain similarities. Okay, una, they were done. Nawala yung word. They were done in Virac, Catanduanes, my hometown. I was born in Virac. I grew up in Virac. And I consider it as my hometown, as my very own. Now, itong 2 ito ay ito yung limited type, no? Kanina nabanggit ko, 2 klaseng ethnography, yung isa broad scope, ito yung traditional ethnography where you have to describe everything in a
This meeting is being recorded.
Time. So ayun, record. Hello, I'm still on board. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you have to. I have to check every now and then kasi may mga nagpa-flash dito sa aking screen na daw yung internet ko daw ay nag-slow down. Anyway, so itong anthropology at home itong ethnography at home na ibibigay ko na 2 ay parehong limited type. Hindi ito yung broad scope ethnography dahil nakafocus lamang ito on particular local cultural issues in Virac, Catanduanes, and they involve relatively short periods of time to do. Siguro yung isa ginawa ko lang in 2 months. Okay na, tapos na. Hindi kasama doon yung writing. Now, ang isa pang commonality dito sa 2 bibigay kong case study ay yung ethnographer, ako, I am my own informant. This is something that is not typically done by anthropologists, wherein you yourself, you become your own informant. But when you do ethnography at home, ganito ang nangyayari. Ikaw mismo nagiging source of data, nagiging informant. Lalong-lalo na yung pangalawa kong study, mamaya-maya ipipresent ko. Practically, I drew data mostly from my own experience. Hindi ako masyado nag-interview kasi nga ginamit ko na yung mga knowledge ko na na-pick up from other people in the course of me being somebody from Iraq who lived there and grew up there. Now, itong dalawang, another thing about these two studies that I'm going to present is that both of them touched on the issue of identity. So mamaya-maya, I'll be elaborating more of that. And then, isa pa, nakatangian ng dalawang ito ay yung both of these case studies are keen on the historical context of culture. Let me give a little more explanation. In the traditional ethnography, meron tayong tinatawag na ethnographic peasant or sometimes they call it ethnographic cut. Parang ang ginagawa ng ethnographer, pupunta sa isang lugar and makes he makes this assumption na nag-freeze yung culture, hindi nag-change. Parang fini-freeze niya yung culture. Parang kinukuha na niya ng snapshot. Frozen. It's an eternal present. Kaya pag gumawa ang ethnographer ng kanyang write-up, naka-present tense lahat. Kasi as if everything is going on like it did before and it's not changing. So parang kumuha ka ng isang slice ng buhay ng mga tao. Ini-slice mo sa time flow. Freeze mo yung time. Sabi mo parang, teka, freeze mo na kayong lahat at mag-research ako. Wala mo nang babaguhin sa culture nyo, ha? Yan. Parang ganon dati. No? Assumption yan ng ethnographic method na parang fini-freeze mo. Or sometimes you call it ethnographic cut. Kinakat mo yung flow ng history. And then, sabi mo sa sarili mo, I am trying to describe culture as it is, as I have found it. Pero, me personally as an anthropologist, I have some reservation about this assumption because I take in a lot of the history. Kasi ang assumption ko, ang culture hindi pa din tumigil. Patuloy itong tumatakbo. Even as we speak, yung kultura ay nagbabago. Kaya, to understand the culture, you have to look into the past. You have always to look into how that culture came to be. So, kaya yung mga ginagawa kong ethnographic research, hindi lang itong dalawang to, pati na yung iba kong nagawa dati, ay malakas yung context ng history. So yun, no? Yan po yung mga katangian itong dalawang studies na to na ipipresent ko ngayon. Okay, so let me teka, di naghihiwas. Para nag-freeze itong aking... Bakit nag-freeze yata itong aking ano?
Yung arrow, Dr.
Yeah.
Click on the arrow.
Ayaw mag-anong arrow ko.
You can use your cursor.
Okay. 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 Sandali. Okay. That's it. Okay. So, let me start with the first. I understand that medyo late yata ako nakapag-submit. but I understand that copies, ma'am, had been distributed of the articles.
Yes, I have posted your articles sa isang link for the participants, Dr. Man.
Okay. Yeah. So, i-assume na lang natin na nabasa na ng ating mga participants. Although, ipipresent ko yung findings and so on, pero hindi ganun kadetalyado. I don't think we have enough time for that. I'll just be tackling the main points. So, the first study is called Pantumina Katandunganon Version, Choreographing Identity and the Politics of Dance in Insular Bicol. So let me explain the title a little bit. So this is a study that focuses on the Pantumina dancing Katandunganon version, because there are many versions, and I'm talking here about politics of dance in Insular Bicol. Insular Bicol being Catanduanes. Of course, Masbate is also another island, Bicol Island. Pero ang inaano ko rito, ang binibigyan ko dito ng emphasis, talking about Insular Bicol, is that Bicol is basically insular and peninsular. Mainland Bicol and Insular Bicol. Mamaya-maya makikita natin yung significance ng differentiation na to. Okay, now, naniniwala ako na it's important, no, to make clear your assumptions about the research that you do. Kasi yung iba, no, some people would say that when they do research, no, even in ethnography, they go to the field, they start the investigation with zero thing in their minds. Like people, they will just like to make the reality speak to them. Pero sa akin, I do not exactly work that way. I would always try to make clear yung mga assumptions ko bago ako mag-umpisa ng research. Meron ng assumptions. It's important to be clear about it. Because para sa akin, yun yung starting point, yun yung jump off point in doing the investigation. Para itong parang hunch na ito. Kung anong meron na dadatnan ko, or kung anong, ito na yung basic kong framework. No? Sometimes, ito yung framework, pinatawag natin theoretical or conceptual framework. Na pinanggagalingan ng gagawin mong research. Parang tipong, you do not start a research with zero thing in your mind. Meron ka lang kahit pa paano pinag-umpisahang pananaw. At ito yun. My assumption is that Pantumina Catanduanes version is not something that has been lying around since time immemorial. Sabihin, Pantumina Catanduanes version is not an objective reality out there that is just waiting for people to notice. But my assumption is that it was actually actively constituted or constructed, sometimes you use the word constructed, by stakeholders for a purpose. Okay? So in short, itong Catanduanes version in many ways is an invention. It's a construction or a creation, if you will. And they had been actively constituted by stakeholders for a purpose. Meron silang agenda. And it involved a dynamic process of power play. Hindi ito simpleng proseso ng construction, but involved some power playing by stakeholders. And another thing, itong proseso ng pagbuo ng Katandunganon version ng Pantumina had been shaped by historical factors. Naglaro yung history, no? So hindi ito basta namuo, kundi namuo ito along a historical evolution, if you will. Okay, so yung assumption basically ay a theoretical aspect ito. So ang mga issue ng teorya na na-touch ko dito politics of identity. Ang usaping identity ay isang political na usapin. Pag sinasabi ko pong political, hindi naman ibig sabihin yung politician o yung gobyerno, although siyempre kasali sila doon. Pag sinabi ko pong political, ang ibig kong sabihin, may kinalaman dito yung paggamit ng power in decision making. No? Decision making, things have to be decided, like coming up with a Katandunganon version of Pantomina. Things have to be decided, and when they decide, may dynamics. Okay, who gets to decide, so on. And then another thing na isang issue din ito ngayon sa anthropology, yung tradition ay invento. So invention of tradition. This is a contradiction in words, in terms, because tradition is supposed to be something stable, pero inimbento pala. Tradition supposedly comes from way back into the past, pero ito naman pala ay may pinanggalingan. Inimbento somewhere in time. So yan po yung mga issue, theoretical issue na natouch ko dito sa ethnography ito. Ano ba yung objectives ko sa paggawa nito? Dalawa. Una, I wanted to establish the historical trajectory of the Pantomima dance as it is implicated as a marker of national, regional, and sub-regional identities. So merong history, yung pagbubuo ng Pantomima dance on many levels. No? Ito ay na-implicate, okay, sa national na usapin, sa regional and sub-regional identities. Pangalawa, more specifically, to describe the dynamics of interaction between parties involved in the various moments of construction, inscription, interpretation, and presentation of the Pantomima Katandunganon version. So may dynamics ng interaction ng mga stakeholders dun sa pagbubuo ng Pantomima Catanduanes version. So yun po yung dalawang objectives na gustong makamtan itong aking ginawang case study. Itong ginawa kong ethnography at home. Now, methodology, siyempre, participant observation, interview of key informants, and ito po, ito yung sinasabi ko, I made a lot use of personal knowledge and experience. I drew a lot from insights from my experience in the past about Pantomima. Kasi po, bata pa ako, palagi ko napapanood yung Pantomima, sinasayaw ng mga matatanda in different occasions. And then later on, when I was in college, I became a member of the Hablondawani theater group in the Catanduanes State Colleges before. And I was a dancer. And one of the dances na pinag-aralan namin, yung Pantomima. And another thing, I made a lot use of documentary sources, books, souvenir programs na pinoproduce during fiestas ng probinsya at ng Catanduanes Festival and so on. So ito yung sinasabi ko na multi-method, ang ethnography. You are at liberty to make use of any source that you think would be useful. So yan po ang pinagdaanan kong anong tawag dito, investigation. Okay. Now, elaborate masyado yung mga findings in details, no? Kasi nabasa naman natin yata. So dito na lang po ako sa mga salient na findings. Now along the way as I discussed this, bigyan ko ng konting mga dagdag na detalye. Okay, one. While Katandunganon folk had been dancing and singing the pantomima since time immemorial. By the way, siguro nabasa nyo, pag sinabing pantomima, dalawang bagay. It's not only the dancing, it's actually the singing. Because pantomima is also the song. Okay? So, Katandunganon folk, no, had been dancing and singing the pantomima since time immemorial in various occasions. It's really a cultural practice that is very, very much embedded into the life of the people, of the ordinary folk. Asal, papantumina yan. Kapag mayroong fiesta, papantumina. So you see this dance everywhere, hindi lamang during programs, Filipino Week, kundi talagang people know it. People know the pantomima, the music, and the song by heart. Kasi very intimate sa buhay nila. Now, so that's it. They had been practicing the pantomima. But you know, the standardization of the Katandunganon version of the dance had been brought about by two important historical moments. Okay, so it came to happen that the dance had started and the music, no, the dance and the music started to be standardized into a Katandunganon version. And may mga historical moments na nagdala nito. At ang mga historical moments na to ay parehong tungkol sa assertion of identity. Okay? Una, Philippine nationhood. Ang tinutukoy ko po ditong Philippine nationhood, yung nangyari nung panahon na ng mga Amerikano na kung saan yung Philippine Commission noon nagpadala sa Amerika ng delegation, okay, para to lobby with the American government na pakawalan ng Pilipinas, gawin ng malayang bansa. Parang ganon. Ito yung tinutukoy ko po, no, yung panahon na yon. Yung tinatawag na peacetime noon. So, nabasa niyo naman siguro doon sa aking presentation na yung Philippine nationhood hindi lamang political, ang kasabay nito to convince the Americans na politically pakawalan na tayo, they had to demonstrate that we are worthy of independence. So how did they demonstrate that we are worthy of independence? Maraming anyo, isa na dyan, yung tipong ang Pilipinas ay may sariling kultura, national culture. We are a nation, ganyan. Kaya bigyan nyo na kami ng independence. Tingnan nyo, meron kaming culture na national culture. At ang isa sa pinakamahalagang aspeto nitong national culture na to ay yung dance. At hindi po malaking bagay ang ginawa ni Francisca Reyes Aquino, no? si Aling Kikay, national artist for dance, siya ang pinakauna yatang national artist for dance. Hindi po coincidence na yung trabaho niya to come up with national dances of the Philippines, to encode, no, or to decode these dances, document them, and then eventually writing a series of books on that. This was to demonstrate that the Philippines has a culture, a national culture, at ang isa sa mga ebidensya nito yung dance. Na sabi nila ay kapareho ng mga dances, folk dances sa buong mundo, no? Sa parehong status or dignity. So yun. Yan yung first historical moment. Kasi during that time, nung gumawa na si Mrs. Aquino ng libro, isa sa mga Unang dances na naisama doon sa collection ay yung pantomina. Except that, ang ginamit nilang version ay yung salbay. Now, another moment, historical moment, that has to do with independence or assertion of identity ay yung Catanduanes provincehood. Yung Catanduanes naging probinsya noong 1945. Hindi rin coincidence, no? It happened immediately after the war. So, pagkatapos ng gera, binigyan na tayo ng independence ng ng Amerika. binigay yung independence. Naging na tayong republic. Just a few, days or even weeks in the same time, halos yung Catanduanes nag-assert ng provincehood. Hey, we are a separate province, distinct from Albay, because Albay was our mother province. We were previously a part of Albay. So yung dalawang importanteng historical moments na yun ay naging malaking bahagi sa pag-develop ng Katandunganon version of the pantomina. In both moments, dance, nabanggit ko na, had become a useful identity marker. So, nung naging independent na Catanduanes, maliban sa pagiging politically independent, siyempre, nagsumikap ang mga taga-Catanduanes na i-demonstrate ang kanilang pagiging worthy of being a distinct province. Isa na doon to demonstrate na merong Catanduanes culture na distinct. And one way to do this is to identify a Katandunganon version of the pantomina dance. Of course, the pantomina dance is the quintessential Bicol dance. Pero sabi namin, meron din kami. Meron kaming sariling version. Okay? Both doon sa singing, saka doon sa pagsayaw. Now, hindi naman kaagad-agad namuo ang Katandunganon version ng pantomina. It developed through time. No? It was distilled through time. Unang-una, ang pinakauna dyan na measure, there was this group of musicians, ni-record nila yung pantomina music ng Catanduanes. Nagkaroon sila ng recording for commercial distribution. So, ang naging epekto nito, lalong na-popularize yung music. At dahil may music na, madali na rin magsayaw sa iba't ibang venue. Kasi dati, para magkapagpantomina, meron kailangan makakanta, live, merong musician. But now, merong 45. Ang original nga nito, I'm still looking for a copy of that. Yung 38 RPM na plaka. Yan yung una, and then later on naging 45 RPM. So, yun ang pinakauna. That was in 1953. Next, nag-umpisa nang mabuo yung standard choreography. Okay, hindi rin ito ganun kadali. Basta na lang siya namuo dahil there was this need, no, to dance the pantomina in formal functions. Okay. Halimbawa, during inauguration of newly elected officials, during the town fiesta, wherein the entire official dam of the town, nagsasayaw sila, no? Dati-rati, Rigudon de Honor ang ginagamit na sayaw, pero later on ginawa ng pantomina. So yung ganong klase ng shift. At unti-unti, namuo itong standard choreography. Ang purpose ay i-showcase yung Katandunganon culture. Isa pang pagkakataon na ito ay nagawa ay halimbawa merong Bicol meet, kunyari, may Bicol meet. So yung mga taga-Catanduanes, pag merong cultural night during the Bicol sports meet, sinasayaw nilang Catanduanes pantomina. Parang this is now a way of projecting Catanduanes culture to the region. Okay, and finally, some teachers, at the Catanduanes State Colleges, they codified the dance steps. Sinulat na. Meron ng dance notation na ginawa. I think that was very important na standardized na ang choreography. At dahil eskwelahan ang naggawa nito, pinamulbon itong notation na to sa iba-ibang mga schools, tinuro sa mga PE classes ng elementary, high school, and so on, na-popularize ang Catanduanes version. Ang problema lang doon, okay. Yung problema, yeah. Now, the process of standardization was prevailed upon by dominant socio-political stakeholders and arbiters of taste. Ang dami-dami pong version ng kanta ng pantumina all over the province. Kaso, along the way, meron na lang iisang version na naging popular. Kasi pinili na. At parang sinabi na ito ang standard. Alam niyo kung bakit ginawang standard yung kanta na ngayon? Kasi hindi masyadong bastos. The pantomima singing, sexual tones. Ngayon, naghanap sila ng version na hindi masyadong sexual kasi nga naman gagawing standard. Okay? Na magiging marker na ng Catanduanes identity. Baka naman sabihin, ay, ang babastos naman. Kaya namili sila. So meron ng mga nag-decide, no? Ay, ito, hindi yan, ito. Ganon. So may mga arbiters of taste, and these arbiters of taste and the stakeholders are the elite, socio-political elite of the province. And mainly, they were based in Virac, the capital town. So mayroong finabor na version. At nasuppress yung ibang version. Yan ang naging problema ng standardization. Nasuppress yung improvisations na ginagawa ng mga dancers, ng mga singers. So yun yung effect of standardization. Na-popularize ang pantomima through different performance venues in schools, in mass demonstrations, during fiestas. Tinanggal na doon sa traditional context of dancing. Ginawa ng festival, ganyan. Ginawa ng palabas sa stage rather than sa isang actual na kasalan. So nailabas na siya doon sa kanyang original context of dancing. Okay, ang problema pa, na-suppress na yung improvisation and creativity ng mga tao. Okay, so yun po ang salient findings, no, ng una kong case in point na study tungkol sa pantomima. Okay, so let me go to the next. Okay, the second study is the Catanduanos making and seeing selves through the eye of the typhoon. Actually, let me make some confession here. I was really reluctant in submitting this for this seminar kasi it was published, okay, in Daghang Tao. But when I showed it to my friends and my colleagues and have them read it, sabi nila, wow, ano to? Medyo difficult reading, sabi nila. Ganun ba? I did this like in the late 1990s. So medyo matagal na. Sorry. Hindi 1990s. Siguro mga 2005, ganyan. Okay. Now, I think alam ko kung bakit medyo naging difficult reading. Kasi it is a material that should have been written in the thick manner of doing ethnography. It should have been done in a book length form. Mahaba dapat na paliwanag at mga presentation ng data. Kaso parang kinondense ko masyado sa isang into a few pages kaya wow, kaya ganun siguro na naging resulta siguro mamaya-maya, I think some of you will tell me na talagang some of you will confirm itong sinasabi ko na medyo difficult reading siya. But anyway, tinuloy ko pa rin kasi para sa akin isang magandang halimbawa ito ng doing ethnography at home precisely because meron tong particular approach yung sa tinatawag na auto-ethnography. Ibig sabihin, yung auto-ethnography, yung ethnographer ang parang pinaka-source, principal source lamang. Hindi na masyado nag-rely sa ibang mga sources. Parang tipong one is enough and that one is me. Parang ganyan. Bilang practitioner ng kulturang gusto kong i-describe at i-analyze. So, auto-ethnography. Some anthropologists would, frown upon this particular type of doing ethnography. Pero I tried it here. And happy naman ako dun sa result. And in fact, I am planning to come up with a book-length form to give justice para sa akin dito sa material na to. Kasi medyo malawak. Okay, ito yung mga assumptions ko. No? Yung kanina, dun sa una, meron akong assumptions. Ito yung theoretical framework talaga that informs this investigation. May tatlo po. Una, ang sinasabi dito, one's sense of identity is intimately connected to one's sense of place. So yung identity at saka yung place ay konektado. Mahirap pag-usapan ng identity kung hindi natin titingnan yung lugar. Kasi yung identity tungkol sa tao, tungkol sa self, pero yung self, hindi siya mabubuo out of context. Ang pinaka-context niya, yung place, yung space na kung saan siya lumaki at umikot at namuhay. Or in another way of saying it, your self-concept is largely shaped by your experience of place. So geography, no? Geography. Basically, when we talk of place, we're talking of geography in all its aspects. So yun, yung connection na yun ang gusto kong explore dito. Pangalawa, yung identity at saka sense of place are socially and culturally constructed. Ito na naman po, siguro nakikita niyo, parang paborito ko yata itong notion of social construction. Now, kung tutuusin, place is something that is stable. Place is something that is given. No? Geography is something given. You don't have much control over geography. It's already there. You find it. Pero ang sinasabi ko dito, hindi po yung sense of place ay constructed. In a way, parang invention. Binuo mo na yan. Hinulma mo. Okay? Kamukha ng identity. Hinulma mo. Yung identity, madali nating sakyan. Talagang hinuhulma mo yan. Pero yung sense of place, parang wow. Anyway, yun ang assumption ko dito. Yan ay parehong socially and culturally constructed. Now, another thing that I assume here is that both identity and sense of place are so constructed according, again, ito, no? Historical factors. Therefore, identity and sense of place can change through time. So, depende sa pinagdadaanan nitong historical factors. So, hindi po sila stable na mga reality, yung identity. Even Katandungan identity is not something stable and eternal. They are, it changes. No? Pati yun nga, yung sense of place mo. Yung place mo, nandyan na yan, yung bundok, nandyan na yan. Pero yung sense of place, nagbabago. Depende sa how you deal with the bundok or with, with the surroundings. Or how the surroundings impact into your life. Okay, yan po yung mga assumptions. Now, ano yung objective ko? Isa lang po. Ang balak ko talaga dito sa study na to, to explore the connection between identity and place through the Katandunganon experience. So ginamit ko yung Katandunganon experience bilang isang patutuo or case in point tungkol dun sa connection ng identity at sense of place. So Katandunganon identity as being shaped by Katandunganon geographic features, which to me is very specifically characterized by two things. Ang dalawang litaw or lutang na katangian ng Katandunganon geography, dalawang bagay, insularity, yung pagiging itong isla. At hindi lamang ito isla, basta isla ito ay nakalagay sa isang lugar kung saan palagi itong nabubugbog ng bagyo. So the very location of the island of Catanduanes is such that it receives a lot of typhoons quite fresh from the factory of typhoons, Pacific Ocean. We are facing the Pacific Ocean directly, and during the months of September, October, November, up to December, hala, andyan na. No? Kami ang unang nahihit palagi ng bagyo habang ito'y nasa kasagsagan ng kalakasan niya. So we have experienced a good number of super typhoons. Of course, the most recent is Typhoon Rolly. So yung dalawang katangian na yun, yung pagiging isla at yung pagiging bagyuhin, yun ang para sa akin ay dalawang geographic features that shape the Katandunganon identity. So yan po, basically yung gusto kong explore, yung connection na yan dito sa aking ginawang study na to. Okay, now, methodology. Paano ko ba ito kinayod? Paano ko ito itinawid? Itong ethnography na to, ito yung aking mga method. Una, nabanggit ko na kanina, auto-ethnography or doing ethnography at home where the principal informant is one's own self. Ako mismo ang bida, ang pinaguhugutan ko ng data, yung sarili kong experience. Kaya kung siguro yung isang tao na wala pang masyadong experience, hindi pa pwede itong gawin. Although, siyempre debatable yan. Sino naman ang taong wala pang experience para paghugutan ng kanyang mga pananaw. Nung ginawa ko ito, I was already like 40 years old. So, marami-rami na akong bagyo at saka marami-rami na ang pagdaanan ko tungkol sa isang pagiging Katandunganon. So, kaya marami na akong pinaghugutan. So I made use of my own experience. Okay? But experience, you get it from interactions, di ba? At very particularly, kumuha ako ng yung experience ko dito, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, interaction ko with 3 generations. Yung pakikitungo ko sa 3 henerasyon sa buhay ko. Una, my grandparents and parents together. Ito na yung generation before me. Okay? Of course, mahaba yan, pero bakit dalawa lang? Kasi ito yung dalawang generation na nakaugnay ko directly. No? Yung grandparents ko at saka yung parents. Pangalawa, yung sarili kong henerasyon. Pangatlo, yung mga generation after me. So yung interaction ko sa 3 ito yung pinaghugutan ko ng mga experience ko na ginamit ko dito sa study na to. Bakit 3 henerasyon? Kasi nga gusto kong makapture yung historical changes, no? in Katandunganon identity vis-a-vis geography or geographic features. Now, so the data consisted of reconstructions. So, na-reconstruct ko yung mga experience ko. Pero along 3 dimensions. Una, views of insularity. Ano bang pananaw nitong tatlong henerasyon na to tungkol sa pagiging isla, pagiging taga-isla. Pangalawa, orientation to typhoons. Paano ba sila nakikitungo sa bagyo? Sa dalawang paraan din, paano yung pag-predict? Kasi pag pinag-usapan ng bagyo, it's very important yung tungkol sa pag-predict ang pagdating nito. At saka kapag nandiyan na siya, kung paano nakikitungo ang mga tao sa mga bagyo. How do we deal with typhoons? Okay? When I talk to people na hindi taga-Catanduanes, sabi ko, pag tinanong nila ako, ano yung mga taga-Catanduanes ba sila? Oh my God, sabi ko, we are people who know how to deal with typhoons. In fact, we know typhoons better than human nature. Mga ganyang klase na pakulo or patutsada. Okay, yung pangatlo, yung sense of identity. So itong tatlong to, tinignan ko dun sa tatlong henerasyon. Meron akong matrix dito, parang ganito. On the left side, sources of data, the 3 generations. On the horizontal axis, yung data sets mainly composed of 2 clusters, sense of place and sense of identity. When I talk about sense of place, I'm talking about orientation to typhoons and view of insularity. And yun nga, tingin ko hindi ko masyado, kinulang ako ng space in a few pages. Medyo malawak ito, mukhang hindi ko masyado na stress out doon sa well, I tried my best. Ewan ko kung nasakyan nyo, hindi ko masyado na stress out doon sa aking presentation. I believe I need a book length. Anyway, ito po yung aking matrix of data gathering. Okay, now, let me go to the salient findings. 1. Fundamentally, the Katandunganon sense of identity is hinged on 2 salient aspects of their sense of place, namely insularity and the recurring typhoons. So nabanggit ko na yan. Now, as such, the Katandunganons basically define themselves as resilient and hardy people. Makikita niyo ito sa mga mga souvenir program, no? Describing what the Katanduanos are. Palagi itong dalawang to, resilient and hardy people. So, bakit? The insularity made them self-contained. Parang tipong meron kaming insular pride. Hey, we can take care of ourselves. Naka-isolate kami, nakamaroon kami. There's a big body of water surrounding us, separating us from the mainland. But we can still, take care of ourselves. Parang may ganung klaseng insular pride. Now, on the other hand, the frequent typhoons, ito yung tinatawag na crucible ng aming character. Ito yung nagsishape ng aming character. Dahil kami ay subok na subok sa kahirapan ng hamok sa bagyo, nakabuo ng character na resilient. Ganon. So, yan yung basic na pananaw ng mga taga-Katanduanes tungkol sa sarili nila. Merong isa pa dyan na dagdag, yung pagiging religious. Ako naman, ang tingin ko, yung pagiging religious na yan ay bunga din itong dalawang to. Bakit kami religious? Kasi palagi kaming humaharap sa mga pagsubok, sa mga risk, sa mga uncertainties. Kaya kami nagiging religious. At itong mga pagsubok, uncertainties na to, dala din naman ng mga bagyo at saka ng pagiging namin isla. So, ganyan-ganyan po ang itsura ng Katandunganon identity ngayon. Okay. Even so, such basic self-definition manifested variously. No? It looks like stable self-identity, but it has gone through changes, through time, brought about by changes in the sense of place itself of the generations. In the way they experience insularity, there were changes in the way these generations experienced insularity and typhoons. Nagbago-bago din po. As for the generations before me, grandparents and parents, they relied more on traditional knowledge of typhoons, formed through very intimate familiarity with their environment. Nakaka-amaze yung parents ko, grandparents ko, they can predict more or less by smelling the air, by looking at, the heavens. They can predict, sasamang panahon, ganyan-ganyan. So, intimate knowledge of the environment. Ganyan-ganyan ang source lalo na yung mga grandparents ko. Just to give you an example, this is nakatandungan nun, schemata of the winds. Yan yung mga namin, no? Yan yung mga traditional na mga term. Now, just one point, I would like to call your attention. Wow, we identify several habagats. Habagat is not just one kind. Para sa amin, merong 1, 2, 3, 4 types of habagat. Yung ibang hangin, amihan, walang mga distinction. Bakit yung habagat may iba-iba? And if you go outside of Catanduanes, itong skemata na to, hindi na pwede. Kasi may reference doon sa geography ng Catanduanes, yung aming mga neighbor. Habagat sa Lagunoy, kasi galing sa Kamsur, Lagunoy. Berdaderong habagat, ito daw yung tunay na habagat. Igong habagat sa Mayong, galing naman ito sa bandang Albay. And of course, the last kind of habagat sa Bakong, Sorsogon. Bakit? Kasi, one, habagat is the strongest, no? The most destructive of all these monsoons. And during a typhoon, yung mga tao, they watch doon sa pagbago-bago ng direksyon. Kasi kapag nasa habagat sa Bakong, malapit na sa Salatan, and Salatan is the signal that the typhoon is already tapos. So parang this is a countdown to the end of the typhoon. Kaya lang itong countdown na to, the last 30 minutes or 1 hour of the typhoon, talagang malakas, very destructive. Kaya yung mga tao, sinusundan, nasaan na? Lagunoy na. Ay, Verdadero na. Okay, Mayong, and so on. And then, okay, salamat. Salatan na. So yan. Yung ganyang knowledge, kukunti na lang ang meron yan. Yung generation ko, meron pa kami, pero yung mga sumunod sa akin, hindi na nila alam yan. Okay. So subsequent generations, those after me, however, started to abandon traditional knowledge and skills and resorted more and more to scientific explanations and the use of more of modern media source of information. Binigay ko ito dun sa sa article, pinapakita dito yung iba't ibang generation ng kanilang source of information about typhoons. So nakikita natin diyan yung scientific knowledge nag-umpisa doon sa parents ko kasi nag-aaral sila. Okay? Yung mga libro nila on geography kalalaki, no? Ang hirap buhatin. So they were schooled, although they are familiar with the traditional, but they were schooled dun sa scientific method. Tapos yung later generation, ayan, gumagamit na ng TV, internet, and so on. Now, meron akong tawag, yung mga grandparents ko, ito yung mga sky watchers. They were searching the heavens for signs. Ito namang parents ko tsaka my own generation, we were trained to read maps and plot the typhoons. But itong mga bagong generation monitor gazers. Yung monitor ng cellphone at saka ng TV, doon sila tumitingin kasi meron ng mga GPS, meron ng mga si Mang Tani, no? Meron ng very visual na na image. Hindi mo na kailangang i-plot ang coordinates tulad ng dati. So, yan. Okay. Now, another thing, the different generations involved also had varying sense of insularity depending upon their degree of interactions with outside world. Halimbawa, yung grandparents ko, they hardly had any clear knowledge of the outside world. Akala nila Manila is a legend. there were those in the generation of my grandparents na hindi sila makapaniwala na may Manila. Akala nila istorya lang. So, they had a very strong sense of self-containment. They have a very stable sense of insularity. Okay? But this would be eroded as Katanduanon started to have greater interaction with the world outside there. Halimbawa, members of the generation of my parents, when they went to high school, they have to go to Albay. Kasi walang high school sa Catanduanes nung araw. And then when they come home, they tell stories about, the Ibongnon, people of Albay, and with a different, accent and so on. So, yun. Now, nag-intensify itong interaction na to, lalong-lalo na yung increasing globalization dahil sa technology na communication sa transport. Wow. Yung mga taga-isla naging very familiar now with the world outside. And dati-rati merong animosity. No? I think you have read about it in my article. Dati may animosity ang taga-isla sa taga-mainland. No? We resent it. No? We suffer some discrimination when we go to mainland. To the mainland Bicol. No? May mga bansag sa amin. So, but ngayon nawawala yun. Nawawala na yun. Now, so the Katandunganon sense of identity is therefore something that changed through time according to how their sense of place has also evolved. So, the Katandunganon's sense of identity is a work in progress. So yan po ang aking, hanggang doon na lang po ang aking sharing. I think mas mahalaga yung kasi, mahaba na ba? Mas mahalaga siguro yung interaction. Yung question and answer, kasi doon naman tayo mas nag-enjoy talaga at mas natututo. So, Diyos mabalos sa inyong pagdangog sa inyong tiyaga. Ma'am Jo, okay na po ako.
Thank you, Dr. Ramon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Ramon Felipe Sarmiento on the
Salamat din po.
Yes, po, on ethnography at home. We will now proceed with the second resource speaker. Let me now introduce our second resource speaker. Josefina Socorro Flores Tondo earned her bachelor's degree from the University of the Philippines, Manila, and Master of Science in Pastoral Sociology from the Asian Social Institute. She earned her Doctor of Philosophy and Anthropology degree at the University of Canterbury, where she was a recipient of the UC Doctoral Scholarship Award. Her doctoral thesis was presented to an international panel of anthropologists and passed accepted without revision. She was an academic and animation staff of the East Asian Pastoral Institute, Ateneo de Manila University, and a lecturer of the Institute of Formation and Religious Studies, teaching sociology of change and sociology of religion for more than 10 years. She was a volunteer community organizer in Kenya and the Philippines, working with the farmers, slum dwellers, women, and youth. She was a research associate at the University of Santo Tomas Social Research Center, now called UST Research Cluster for Culture, Education, and Social Issues, and a consultant for community development projects for the poor of UST, SRC, and Zambales. She was the former Dean of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources former Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and a very brief stint as OIC President of the Camarines Norte State College, while holding the position as the Vice President for Research and Extension Services of the Camarines Norte State College, which she still currently holds. She's currently the CNSC focal person for gender and development and editor-in-chief of the Camarines Norte State College Research Journal. She is also a member of the board of the Anthropological Association of the Philippines. Jo Tondo's research interests are diaspora, transnational internal migration, transnationalism, globalization, religion, ritual, performance, and symbols. She was a course co-convener, tutor, and guest lecturer at the University of Canterbury. Let us all welcome our Vice President for Research and Extension, Dr. Josefina Socorro Eston. Ma'am?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me, Ma'am Grace?
Yes, ma'am. Clear
Okay,
po.
I will share my screen now. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mon. I'm very happy about what you have presented. As part of the Philippine Ethnographies module, let me now focus on the ethnographies of mobile transnational subjects. This is not to mean that people do not move at all and that only some people move. What I'm saying is that some people move farther than others. So just to have a gentle reminder to all participants, keep your devices muted at all times during this session kasi kung minsan may manarinig na ingay. And then participants' comments may be posted in the chat box. Now, let me start by a quote from Steve Jobs. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. I would like to connect this to what Ellie suggested this morning. You need to love what you're doing. I do remember telling you during the orientation that I actually never felt I fitted in any discipline until I found anthropology. And I'm so glad I never gave up looking because in anthropology, I found my home. Now, this webinar workshop, we take a look at three processes of learning. You have the guided learning, which would be the modular sessions. You have the independent learning, wherein you do your readings and perhaps field work. And then applied learning, wherein you write your ethnography. Hopefully, we will end up in writing the ethnography. Right now, we are doing the guided learning and you're doing your readings. Hopefully, if IATF permits it, we will be allowed to do our fieldwork. So, this is Module 2, Philippine Ethnographies, Ethnography of Mobile and Transnational Subjects. Cultural anthropology is the study of various ways of being human or human cultures. This means that attention to human beings' diverse beliefs, practices, values, ideas, technologies, economies, and other domains of social and cognitive organization that are integral to their quotidian day-to-day life. That's according to Kotak. So when we talk about ethnography, this is about looking at culture. The intention of ethnography is to see activities as social actions embedded within a socially organized domain and accomplished in and through the day-to-day activities of participants. It is the ability of ethnography to understand a social setting as perceived by its participants that underpins its appeal. That's according to Randall and Rousfield in 2014. Now, what is the advantage of qualitative ethnographic fieldwork research? It enhances the quality of data. Kilala nyo ba yung nakatayo dyan na nakapula? Nakita nyo? Okay, that was me about 13 years ago in Kuala Lumpur, with the Filipinos at St. John Cathedral. So it enhances the quality of data. It distinguishes normative and real behavior, what people say they do, and what people actually do. So, what are the disadvantages? Lagi namang may disadvantage, no? Of course, there would be smaller population studied compared to surveys. Data would be hard to code or categorize. Difficult, if not possible, to record notes while attending a ceremony. Yun ang problema ko while I was recording the sinulog, the sinulog ritual of New Zealand, in Auckland, and the sinulog ritual in Christchurch, New Zealand. So if you're participating in ritual, it's a bit difficult, awkward to be taking notes. If you're participating in a feast, sino ba yung gustong magsulat ng field notes kung gusto mong lang kumain, no? Feast yan, no? Or chasing through a forest for a wild pig hunting event. Kung kasama ka dun sa tribo na nag-hunt, mahirap mag-field notes kasi nahabol ninyo yung wild pig o yung baboy damo. So, on this right, I put in some funny cartoons. So how would you describe your style? Sabi nung anthropologist, I purposely don't have one. Okay, I'll just write generic, unremarkable. Ito yung nag-i-interview. Si anthropologist nag-i-interview. How do you code, what people tell you? Kung minsan, sa sobrang pagod natin, maglalagay na lang tayo ng mga generic comments. And that is actually some of the things that people mistakenly do while they're doing fieldwork. Ethnography seeks to present a portrait of life as seen and understood by those who live and work within the domain concerned. What it terms an appreciative stance through the direct involvement of the researcher in the setting under investigation. Ito yung paulit-ulit na sinabi ni Ellie, ni Suyen, sa ni Dr. Mon, participant observation. So, foundational question. Is culture observable? Fieldwork tayo, pumupunta tayo doon para makita yung kultura. Is culture observable? Can we see culture? So I cite here what Cariter cited from Evans Pritchard's Newer Religion. According to the quote, I was present when a newer was defending himself against silent disapproval on the part of his family and kinsmen of his frequent sacrifices. Question: is silent disapproval an observable behavior? Or is it an anthropological ethnographic interpretation? Any one of you who has experienced growing up in a family, of course we all grew up in a family, but have you ever caught the signals that your father or your mother gives you in terms of approval and disapproval? And can we say that we can actually observe disapproval? So this is a critique, again cited by Carithers. This is about as raw a factual account as you will ever find in most ethnographic works. Yet not a single statement in it expresses a plain observation. Silent disapproval cannot be observed, but only surmised. So, can we observe silent disapproval? Again, Carithers continues to muse. How can knowledge, which we represent to ourselves as being impersonal and objective, be found on matters so subjective and mutable as interpersonal relations? Can we consider the things we gather from interpersonal relations an objective reality or an objective fact or a scientific result of a study? Understanding of scientific knowledge comprises three elements. One would be a community of knowers, or what we call the ethno that we are studying. That's why it's ethnography. No? That which is perceptually consensible to them, meaning to say that it is common knowledge to them. And C, that on which they reach consensus. Oh, they agree. Oh, yeah, totoo yan. We actually agree that this is correct. Okay. And three, to the scientific observers is in principle universal. And even though in practice access is limited by many contingencies in this principle, universality guides the self-understanding and routine procedures of science. In that sense, the whole edifice of science rests upon perceptual consensibility, the ability of people to perceive things in common and to agree upon to share perceptions. Meaning to say, if we agree that this is so, then this is true. If culture is observable, then it must be visible, correct? Or is it? Is it visible? Are all cultural facets visible, or are they surmised by consensibility? Let me go back to that. So if you take a look at this woman praying, can I make a consensible proposal to the people observing her that she is a person of faith? Am I observing faith? Or am I just observing a person standing in front of a prayer statue? These are good questions for ethnographers. We know what it means when one person sits in an elevated position, when everyone around them stands, when one person stands and everyone else sits, when everyone in a room gets up as someone comes in, when someone bows or curtsies, or in extreme circumstances falls to their knees before another who remains standing. So we know there's an important person when people stand up. We know when the person is a colleague when we remain sitting down. And we know there's royalty when we kneel. Or perhaps in church settings, we know that there's someone holy when people go down on their knees to worship. Consensibility means to share or have commonly accepted meanings attributed to symbols, signs, actions, and behavior. Growing up with my siblings, we learn to interpret our mother's facial expression when there are other people around. There is that look in her face, in her eyes, that tells us we have crossed a line that we should not cross at all. In this sense, for me and my siblings, disapproval is observable. Naglalaro-laro kami. Habang naglalaro kami na may mga bisita ang nanay at tatay, hihilingon mo sila laugoninda. Pag nahiling mi na may ibang ekspresyon ang matakan sa kuyang nanay, aram ko na Josepina, may ginawa ka na naman na mali. And that your mother disapproves of what you have done. Ethnography then is grounded on the assumption that culture is observable and that people's actions, which while open to interpretations, may have common shared meanings that could be explained to wider audience of culture observers, such as anthropologists, social scientists, linguistic scholars, educators, etc. The ethnographic research process is thus a collaboration between those who are living and working in the domain and the ethnographer doing the investigation of such a domain. Take a look at the right picture. You see the people doing their visitation, home visitations, and interviews. So, if we are dependent so much on the authors of culture, I do agree with Geertz. I did not put the quote here, but culture is like something that an anthropologist peek into the shoulder of the ones writing it. Culture is a text that we read from the shoulders of the authors. So in that sense, if they are the authors, then we approach these people who are the authors with much respect. And I find the classical, quote from James Spradley about this, very, very worthwhile for us to reflect upon as ethnographers. James Spradley writes, I want to understand the world from your point of view. I want to know what you know in the way that you know it. I want to understand the meaning of your experience, to walk in your shoes, to feel things as you feel them, to explain things as you explain them. Will you become my teacher and help me understand? This is what I was talking about when I commented after the input of Suyen and Ellie, that anthropologists are always learning. We do not claim expertise at all about the culture of peoples. We recognize that different peoples, are the authors of their cultures. And therefore, anthropologists are perpetual learners. We continue learning the whole time we are on the field. And we continue learning while we are writing our ethnographies. The ethnographer field worker then must communicate to the local people or subject of study as a student wanting to learn about a subject on which they are the experts. Very, very important also not to assume that the person in front of you knows less than you. There are some, I have heard this, at CNSC, literacy program for the indigenous people. Okay, we need to be very careful about that, because are we assuming that the indigenous peoples are not literate? Are we talking about literacy in terms of formal literacy, as in going to school? Or are we talking about literacy of the indigenous peoples in terms of dealing with their context and their environment? If I even jokingly told one faculty member, if I left you in the forest with a native indigenous person, who do you think will survive better? Because the forest is something that they know, and therefore they are literate in that sense. Ethnographers need to be good, alert participant observers, like observing behavior, quotidian, seasonal behaviors, spotting, identifying common threads, like, for example, repeated words or trending conversations. Common artifacts, material objects, and symbols that you find. Itong trending, when I was listening to migrant workers talking among themselves, especially the domestic workers of Malaysia and Singapore, the common trend or conversation would be, especially for those who have experienced negative things about their employers, would be tao, how they're being treated as non-tao or as if they are not human. Okay, so this is repeated among the experiences of domestic workers. In terms of cultural artifacts, when I was visiting homes of Filipinos in New Zealand, I found the Santo Niño image in almost every home of Filipino residents. And for people who did not have, their own residences yet, because they just came, they carried the small items of the Santo Niño and some novena prayers of the Santo Niño. So very, very important for us to be aware that people carry in their bodies some expressions of identity and some things that they consider important. Actions, what rituals do they attend, and what happens, what will be their roles in the rituals, the flows and the orders of some things they do in their actions. We already know this. It's been repeated by Suyen and Ellie and Doc Mon. Ethnography is ethnographer-centered, mediated by the ethnographer's native culture, interpretive abilities, social relationships in the field. In the writing of the ethnography, the ethnographer self-acknowledges a quite different alternative to present his judgments about one group in a manner which will be persuasive to another group. So you have one group here that you've been observing, you've been interacting, you're doing research, and then you write about it, in your ethnography, because you want to present this group to a wider set of audience who would want perhaps or be interested to know them better. Of all the disciplines deployed in studying globalization, I now shift, this thing, like when we talk about ethnography, how is it applied in other ways aside from ethnography at home? So according to Hage, of all the disciplines, Hage, by the way, is based in Australia, okay? Of all the disciplines deployed in studying globalization, migration, and mobility, none are better equipped to capture the complexities of such social realities than an ethnographic analysis. Will this be true? Let me continue my discussion. So, according to Rosaldo, and this is part of the readings I gave to the people who are enrolled in this module, okay? Culture is defined by difference. Difference both makes culture visible to observers and makes it relatively easy to separate nature from nurture. It is easy to spot. Doc Mon alluded to this, no? Pag naiiba, madali mong makita. Tingnan mo yung costume nitong tao dito sa picture, no? She's so colorful, and therefore, you know immediately that she is coming from a different culture because she is different. To continue from Rosaldo, cultural similarities could be biologically based, but differences require cultural explanation. To pursue a culture is to seek out its differences and then to show how it makes sense, as they say, in its own terms. In fact, Rosaldo is one of those Western anthropologists who came to the Philippines to do ethnography in the Cordillera Mountains, specifically the Ilongots. And his wife, Michelle, tragically died during their field work. Since cultural practices can be seen and thus observable, thus all cultures are deemed visible for observation, right? Or not? When we are looking at the world, we are most of the time not conscious of ourselves. We are invisible to ourselves. We are more aware of the other who is distinct, apart, or different from us. And that's why very few people observe themselves or even try to understand their own cultural context. The more we are familiar with one another, the more we cannot see them as the other. When we cannot see them, and I would repeat this very carefully, cautiously even, when we cannot see them, according to Rosaldo, they become people without a culture. In our eyes, according to Rosaldo, we appear to be people without culture. By courtesy, we extend this to post-cultural status to people who resemble us. What are the consequences of making our cultural selves invisible? What cultural politics erase the self only to highlight the other? What is the ideological fallout from display of cultural visibility and invisibility? Again, this has been repeated by the previous speakers. There's something political in terms of viewing cultures. Who views it? Who actually writes about it? Who tries to explain it to others? And then this is the most precautionary or cautionary thing that he would say, in his article. In the Philippine case, the people without culture occupy both ends of the social hierarchy. Roughly speaking, Negrito hunter-gatherers are on the bottom and lowlanders are on top. The difference is between the two ends of the spectrum is that the Negritos are pre-cultural and the lowlanders are post-cultural. I put it in a little bit of, framework here. The hierarchy of cultural visibility and invisibility or transparency. So pre-cultural, the nomadic tribes, why are they considered pre-cultural? Because they have less rituals. They are not stable. They don't stay in one place. They move from place to place, and therefore they don't have some accounts, at least by ethnographers, about their own, for example, architecture or agricultural practices. Now, we go into the post-cultural creolized lowlanders or migrants now. So these are the people who have been trained by the Western world, who have assumed westernized cultural practices. Okay. Now, this at the center is the group that Rosaldo talks about, which is the best target of Western anthropologists. They can study the stable agricultural societies. They have harvest rituals. They have wedding rituals. Everything, is worthy of examining and documenting. There's just one problem. Are we going to agree with him as Filipinos? Do we take this Western model of cultural visibility and invisibility and just accept it without questioning it? And that is the main point of ethnography. We need to be able to question. He explains, evidently, lowlanders are transparent to us because of their colonial heritage. First, they were evangelized under the Spaniards, then they were educated under the Americans. Like us, they have undergone an educational process that has disciplined them and made them fit to live in a city, work in a factory, serve in a penitentiary, or undergo confinement in an asylum. He's trying to be funny here. He actually is a humorous writer, and I do agree that he's a good writer. But I don't agree with his point of view. The model for cross-cultural understanding that produces immigration, so he moves from that point of view to immigration, as a site of cultural stripping away is the academic version of the melting pot. Theories of acculturation and assimilation. In this view, immigrants are absorbed into the national culture. And then he was talking about how from Jose Rizal, when Filipinos go to the US, it becomes George Washington, as the national hero. And so I asked at the bottom, really? Really, 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 as Blackpink group would say in one of their songs. Take a look at the picture on the right. It looks like an ordinary sidewalk sale, and it could be anywhere. But that was happening in Kuala Lumpur. And the vendor is a Filipina domestic worker. So, Ronaldo's assumption is that immigration and residency in the US has culturally assimilated migrants, making them invisible or people without a culture. While there are signs of assimilation among migrant transnationals, I will not deny that, there are stronger signs and manifestations of migrant distinct cultural identity. And here I would give probably a very, very brief summary of the conference, of the ADMO presentation I gave way back in 2013, I think, in Ateneo. And the folklore, ritual, and power presentation I did with Ugat, I think in Davao City, if I remember right. So let me just go to this link. Okay, cannot open now. Sorry, people. So I'll just go. So let me just say that I did some research on migrant activities, and I presented them both in Ateneo. In UST, I also did some public presentation in UST about the migrant diaspora in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. And I also did a presentation of folklore, ritual, and power presentation in One Ugat conference. Now, this is me while doing my field work in Kuala Lumpur. Probably within the question and answer, I can show you the presentations I did, so that you can see the actual field notes of the conversations I had with migrants, because I presented it there complete in script. So this would be the migrants selling things in the sidewalks of St. John Cathedral in Kuala Lumpur. So this would be my Malaysia field notes, okay? Take note that while I do not say I, it is clear that I was in the room, okay? A priest entered the room as the group was preparing to start prayers and began to command them to leave, accompanied by shooing motions of his hands. This gesture, which in Filipino culture is never used on people, left most of the members of the group. I was talking about the Legion of Mary. On the right, you could see them praying. I've been following them for about 5 months at that point. I only went there for the last time before I went back to New Zealand. And just to say goodbye and tell them that I will be coming back by December of that same year. So they were so stunned by the attitude of the priest. As they gathered Mary's icon and their belongings, take note, makikita ninyo sa picture, Mary's icon is there. There's a white, tablecloth wherein Mary's icon is placed. So they gathered that, as they gathered Mary's icon and their belongings, which consisted mostly of packed lunches, the priest momentarily left the room. One of them, Jasmine, which is not her real name, turned to me and said, "That is how he is. That's how rude he is to us. That's how he rudely treats us here, as if we are not human beings. That's how difficult our life is here." And if I remember the Filipino script, ganyan talaga siya. Ganyan siya kabasto sa amin. Ganyan niya kami tratuhin dito. Parang hindi kami mga tao. Ganyan kahirap ang buhay namin dito. Now, when we take a look at that, the ethnographer and the ethno he or she is studying, and somebody turns to you and says that, then we need to be able to figure out what that means, okay? So I went through a process of finding common meaning. So the Filipino notion of mutual human respect demands that acceptance and respect be given even to those of unequal social role, status, or income. Although this view is seemingly essentialist, it must be noted that kapwa-tao, like identity, is fluid. Its interpretation is always contextual. In this instance, the cleric's behavior can be seen in terms of existing power differentials and dualisms in the church, such as the polarities between clergy and lay, male and female. Now you see here the inference being drawn by the ethnographer. I am looking at the power differentials between the clergy and the lay in the Catholic Church, as well as the male and female in general in human societies. Why? Because the priest happens to be male and women are not ordained ministers in the Catholic Church. And therefore, the priest holds a superior position over the ordinary lay and especially women. Demonstrated through words and gesture, this rude behavior is perceived by Filipino domestic workers as a failure to recognize and respect them as fellow human beings. Parang hindi kami tao kung tratuhin. While priests are tasked to keep order in the sanctuary, they are also expected to be, first and foremost, shepherds and pastors who minister to their flock in compassion. So mataas ang expectation. The domestic workers had a very high expectation of priests because after all, they know that they are poor in a foreign country and therefore they view the church as their shelter and perhaps even protector. Now, let's go to my New Zealand field notes. The story of Santo Niño Sinulog Fiesta in Christ Church is intertwined with a novena petition and a bride's migration story. Magda, not her real name, had various pen pals, but a prospective New Zealand suitor exhibited considerable persistence. He made frequent phone calls and eventually expressed marital intentions. Magda, however, I now shift from that, you have a very long interview and you summarize it as an introduction into the background of Magda. And then you write down the background of Magda. And then I shift now to what happened in the interview. Okay? And I write this in the ethnography. Magda, however, could not make up her mind. So she sought divine guidance.